Hello, my name is Abraham Klein. Now, so everybody knows, this video is going to be a little bit more serious than a lot of my other videos that I do.
If I can be serious for a
Yeah,
minute.
thank you, Lance. I appreciate that. So, yes, a lot of them are going to be, this is going to be a little bit more of a serious video. I know usually if you tune into my channel, a lot of time you'll see me and Jacob Apioke, and we'll be sort of kidding around about just about random stuff. Or maybe we're interviewing 5-year-old children or aliens, or guys named Mr. Z, or K-Bebe, or KBB as he likes to call himself. Anyway, not off to a good serious start here, are we? Um, anyway, what I want to talk about today is one of my just, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of healing and therapy and things like that. For those of you who may not know, about 5 years ago, I was in the hospital for almost week shy of 6 months, and during that time, I went through a lot physically, and had to do a lot of. It really put me in a very bad place emotionally. I ended up experiencing anxiety and post-traumatic stress, and that was just the aftermath. Let alone all the physical things that I went through. But it also taught me a lot of lessons, a lot of spiritual lessons, and a lot of life lessons as well. And one thing and it gave me a perspective on things that I did not previously have. Um, it gave me empathy in areas that I never used to have. It gave me an understanding of things that I didn't used to have. And I would never want to go through it again, which believe it or not, I did end up going through twice. The first time it happened was in 2014 into 2015, and the second time it happened would have been the entire summer of 2017. And the second stay, uh, the sequel was not as long, but it was almost as much pain, except it was shortened, so it was like a lot worse pain. Um, but one thing that endured in both times was this thing of therapy. Now, there's a lot of healing that goes on. There's um, especially the aftermath. I think some of the hardest healing comes afterward, and maybe I'll do a video about that at some point. Because there's the emotional and spiritual healing that comes afterward. Because truth is, once you've been in the hospital for a lengthy time and you get out, there is getting back to normal and having to readjust yourself back into normal life and trying to, obviously, if you still have any handicaps, there's the trying to adapt. So much adapting that comes with um, lengthy stays in hospital and all the problems that come with it. But another thing, while you're in the hospital, and probably one of the hardest things that I went through while I was in there, outside of just the normal problems that got me in there, was the therapy that I had to go through. And I can tell you firsthand, I hate therapy. Now, that's the thing about it. I hated therapy, but I also wanted it, because without therapy, I could not get better. And yet, every time I saw those um, cheerful little demons come into my room, it was, I'd be like, oh no, again, I have to deal with these people, and they're gonna totally destroy me and wear me out. And then, of course, I'll probably have to go to dialysis after that. So it's like, ah. So it was like always the worst case scenario. But, and when you think of therapy, you're thinking of trying to increase the strength of your body. A lot of times you're thinking lifting weights and jogging and stuff like that. Well, I was in such a bad place to where this rough, tough therapy that I had to go through, especially early on, was simply standing up, moving my legs, trying to push against them, pushing against their arms and things like that, taking a 1 pound weight and trying to lift it. Yeah, that's how bad it was. But there's a lot of things about this that, despite how much I hated it, it was still good. And as your body gets better, it gives you this, I don't know, because here's the thing, I wasn't just trying to walk, I was also trying to walk with tubes in my throat. I had tubes going down my nose, and we had to walk. Well, I wasn't carrying them, but they were. And here I had a person on either side, and we would look down the end of this hall, and the object was get as close to the end of that hall as you can. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm never going to be able to make it to the end of that hall. And so uh, so we would start in my room, and first object was to get to the end of the room. Then the second object was to get into the hallway. And then as days would go on, we'd try to get farther down the hallway. And days and weeks would go on, and we'd try to get farther down the hallway. And then I remember we finally made it to the end of the hallway. And then the object was to go as far as we could down the next hallway. And I remember one day I got up, and it was tough, man. I was breathing hard, and they always said if you get to where you can't, you're having trouble breathing, just sit down in the wheelchair. I remember one day I was so determined, and I walked all the way down the first hallway, all the way down to the last hallway, and it was like the greatest moment of my life. And I remember recently I went back there, and I started at my room, and I walked all the way down the hall, all the way down to the second hall, and it was effortless. And that's it. But if I hadn't started just getting up out of my chair and walking to the end of my room, I'd have never made it. I'd still be in a bed somewhere. But I had to determine. And here's the thing, I'm not very easily I can always easily convince myself to stay in bed. That is one thing I'm good at, is convincing myself to stay in bed. Convincing myself to get out of bed and walk down the hall, that's difficult. So the fact that they were able to motivate me enough to get back to therapy was a miracle. um, but yeah, if I had not started with that first bit of effort, because when you first start off with therapy, it's little steps, little things, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, just a little bit of movement today, a little bit of movement tomorrow. And there are times where it feels like it's not getting any better. And I, in fact, remember my first time in the hospital. I remember they were, because we were doing the whole stand up, see how long you can stand, sit down, stand up, see how long you can stand, sit down. And then I remember one day, and then we started to tried to go down the hall, and my legs gave out. And the thing is, I got very discouraged because I'd made this little progress, and then I relapsed. Because the truth is, sometimes you relapse, and you end up back where you started from, and then you got to work your way back up, and you make it a little bit farther, and I remember I relapsed probably about 2 or 3 times when I was in the hospital the first time. The second time I actually had experience in it, so I had almost that mindset, okay, if I do stick with this, there's going to be results. The first time I didn't have that. And so there was relapses and discouragement, and I don't know, maybe all this has been a bunch of just mumbo jumbo, and I'm sort of just talking in circles. But the thing that it taught me, if I could just summarize it into a single thought, is that I had to have a starting place. And no matter where you are in your life, in order to recover, in order to heal, there has to be a starting place in your life. You have to take, as they say, take that first step in order to walk that 1,000-mile journey, which who wants to walk 1,000 miles? I don't know. But there has to be a starting place. And it's going to have to be little steps. If you're going to heal, there's going to have to be those little victories. You can have your eyes on the prize for an ultimate victory, but there has to be those little victories along the way. You can't always just expect for everything to just be right where you want it the first time. And as you gain those little victories, that encourages you to keep going, and to keep going, and to keep going, and to keep going. And it reminds me of what the Bible tells us where it says, God hath not, boy, I'm, I'm drawing a blank, but there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. For the Lord will not suffer you above the which you are able, but will the temptation make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. In other words, no matter how bad things get, God gives you that strength to just keep going no matter what. And that's what happens a lot of time in healing. And of course, I'm using the illustration of my physical therapy, but it was that same concept that helped me emotionally as well as spiritually when I came out of the hospital, because there's a lot of healing that takes place. It's not just the physical problems. Yeah, sure, you you know there was a lot of praying for my physical health, but there was a lot of battles going on in my brain, in my head, in my heart, and had it not, if I had not, um, obviously had the help of the Word of God and prayer and the prayer of other folks, it would have been so much harder to get through it. But as I said, there has to be a beginning place where you first realize the need to get out of bed, if you will. And then you've got to focus on those little victories that help you get a little bit farther. And then as you advance and get better, you're able to look at where you've come from, and eventually you can get to those much larger goals, and eventually you can continue to heal. And here's the thing about it: when it comes to healing, emotionally, spiritually, you have to constantly remind yourself of it. Because if I don't, there's still times, and I'm not talking about physically. Of course, physically, it's also true. Really, I mean, if you end up just deciding, well, I'm finally healed, I guess I'm just gonna stay in my bed for 3 weeks. Well, you're gonna have a lot of trouble walking after a while. But if you don't constantly keep yourself working at that, it's easy to relapse emotionally. It's easy to relapse spiritually. That's why you got to stay in the Word of God. If obviously, when it comes to your spiritual health, it's important to stay in the Word of God. It's important to stay in the fellowship of God's people. It's important to stay in prayer. And emotionally, it's important to encourage yourself and to look back on those victories. Not necessarily to dwell on the negative side um, of things, but to remember how God brought you through so much, and to remember how you've been able to overcome these different obstacles in your life. And as I said from the beginning, I hated therapy. And I will probably always hate therapy. If I ever find myself in a similar situation, I'll probably hate it then. But I know when it's all over with that it's worth it. And the same thing goes for any type of healing you're going through in your life. You may hate it. You probably will hate it. But every little victory is another step closer to healing. And that's ultimately what we want, isn't it? So I hope that this bunch of mess that I've spoken to you has been somewhat of an encouragement, and I hope it's helped. It's been almost 14 minutes, and I'm sorry if that's been too long, but I just wanted to say that just to sort of give you just a little bit of insight of what I've been through, and hopefully it'll encourage you as well. So, thank you for watching.